History is full of stories of powerful leaders who seem to, at least at a time, be unstoppable. Think of Roman emperors who built vast arenas and rose to show off their might, or more recently dictators who filled parade grounds with tanks and soldiers to remind everyone just who is in charge. Outwardly, they look impressive, but history has a way of unmasking pride. Behind the pomp and ceremony often lay fear, insecurity, and weakness. What seems unshakable will often turn out to be very, very hollow. Esther begins with a scene that could have been lifted from the history books of any empire. A king showing off his glory, summoning his officials and demanding that everybody admire his wealth and his power. It looks strong, it looks impressive, but as we read on, we discover cracks in the facade. And behind those cracks, though his name is never mentioned, God quietly begins a work of salvation. And that's our focus today, the emptiness of worldly power and the unseen beginning of God's purpose. I titled this When Power and Pride Collide. That's not necessarily helpful for you, but that's what I called it when I was planning and things. So let's just look back through that first chapter together, which I think you can break down into 3 chunks. We've got a sort of portrait of worldly power in verses 1 to 9. The book opens with grandeur. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The writer tells us that he ruled 120 provinces, stretching from India to Kush, the biggest empire the world had ever seen at that point. Immediately, we're meant to feel scale, aren't we? This is power at its height. Look at the little details that amuse me, because I just think they're not necessary, but you put them in there because it helps, is he's sitting on his throne. Did you see that bit? No. He's sitting on his royal throne, because throne wasn't good enough. It was a royal one. You know, isn't just any throne. He's the big boss. He's in Susa, his capital. No. He's in the citadel of Susa. He's in the strongest point at the center, the most important part. He's in the very prime spot. These details just push us into that acknowledging that this is a man who cares about what you think. And then comes a great banquet for 180 days. For those of you who are blessed with slower mathematical abilities like myself, that's 6 months. 6 months. Who was running the country at this point? I don't know. It's a fact that we don't cover, but Xerxes parades his wealth before his officials, his nobles, and his military leaders. Anyone who is anyone had an invite, and they were there to see it. So after this long party for this powerful leader in his kingdom, comes a shorter feast. He hosts a 7-day feast in the palace garden for everyone in Susa, rich and poor alike. A shorter party, but a much bigger invite list. The description is lavish. There's white and blue linen, marble pillars, gold couches, silver goblets, royal wine flowing freely. Again, not just any wine, the royal wine. This is a picture of splendor. And you might think, gosh, this is a generous guy hosting a nice big party. If I had you around for a party, even for one day, and gave you lots of food, and you'd be, he's a really generous guy. When I read this, that's not what I see. This is not about generosity or hospitality. This is about pride, and frankly, this is about propaganda. Xerxes is putting his empire on display. The banquet is a stage on which he acts out his glory, his power, and his wealth. Proverbs 16:18, we read, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. What we know, but Xerxes can't see yet, is that when he shows off his strength, it is the seed of his weakness. It's worth pausing here because human power always wants to project permanence, doesn't it? Everything needs to be stable and firm. Okay, that's what our Prime Minister wishes he had right now, doesn't he? A very strong, stable cabinet who are all working together. Somehow the ground feels a bit rocky at the moment. People who seek power don't just want it for a season. Our Prime Minister, he won't have gone there hoping he only has one term. He'll want multiple terms to really get the job done. And actually, why would we not want that? We want stable government, don't we, where people do this. But so often, human power is not for the good of everyone. And it's such a trap. And it's that seeking to keep it permanent that leads to all sorts of disasters. People who seek power don't just want it for a season. The empire looks indestructible. The wealth looks endless. The ruler looks indestructible. Yet, as we're reminded in Psalm 2, however powerful you are, you cannot stand against the Lord. Psalm 2 tells us, the one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. And that might seem mean. It's like, oh, it's a bit mean, isn't it? The big guy up there laughing at us down here. But I think it's just comical, actually, to think of this sort of tiny human creature pretending he can rule everything, while the God who does rule everything sits on his throne comfortably and says, oh, go on, have a go then. You know, you won't be there forever. Xerxes may sit on his golden couch, his royal throne, but heaven's throne is not threatened. Verse 10 to 18 is where his pride meets resistance. In the first 9 verses, it shows us splendor. The next section shows us pride colliding with reality. On the 7th day, when Xerxes was, this is my quote of chapter 1, this is my favourite line, in high spirits from wine. What a lovely way of saying he was sloshed. I don't know. There's lots of words for that, isn't there? But he was in high spirits from wine. Or, as I like to put it, not in the best decision-making capacity. He commands Queen Vashti to appear before the men wearing her royal crown so they could admire her beauty. How lovely, what a wonderful idea. This is not a natural request. He is treating his wife as another possession to parade, just like the marble pillars and golden cups. Why is the crown mentioned? Well, the crown just reminds us that she is his queen. She doesn't wear a crown because of her own right. She wears a crown because of her marriage to him. The crown is not a symbol for her, but a symbol for him. Vashti refuses. Verse 12 simply tells us, Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command. In that moment, the most powerful man in the world is defied in front of the most powerful guests in the kingdom. Xerxes, who can command an empire from India to Kush, who rules 127 provinces, who can afford a 6-month party where there is no restriction on wine, cannot command his own wife. That is what the younger generation will call awkward. The king's pride quickly turns to anger. He's humiliated. The advisors step in. This is a man who needs a reshuffle. Okay, these trusted men, it doesn't tell us, but let's face it, I'm sure they are too in high spirits from wine. Give him some advice. So, it's important, trusted friends, who want the best for you, which seems... I've written a sentence that doesn't make sense. We'll just skip that one. What advice would you have given the king at that moment? What advice would you have given the king? What you know today, don't worry about trying to imagine yourselves living in that time and that era. The king is drunk. He's in a sort of, he's been there for a while. He's commanded his wife to do something that's demeaning and disrespectful, and she says no. What advice would you give him? I didn't hear that, but I wonder what you'd have done. Because actually, it's in those moments, isn't it? It's in those moments when we are prideful and humiliated and are suddenly feeling weak that we are not our best versions of ourselves. That's the moment where the bits in us that we wish didn't exist come up and speak louder. Okay? We then need friends, don't we? We need people who are rational around us to say, don't do that. You know? I do it to myself. So I write emails but don't press send. And then I go back to them an hour later and go, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. You know? And it's that ability to not press send that's important. And sometimes we need friends around us to do that. He didn't have those friends. He didn't. They think to themselves, if the queen disobeys you, Does that give my wife permission to disobey me? I can see trouble ahead. Their response is insecure, even paranoid. The man who looked invincible is revealed as fragile. This is the truth about worldly power. It's more brittle than it appears. Isaiah 40 reminds us, surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are regarded as dust on the scales. Xerxes looks overwhelmed in human eyes. To God, he is dust. Here we see pride unmasked. Pride was overreaching. Pride always exposes weakness. Pride always collides with reality. And then in the last section of this, verses 13 to 22, we see power trying to grasp for control, trying to sort it out. The advisors suggest a decree, because what do you need in marital issues? Permanent, unbreakable laws. Vashti is to be banished, and a new queen chosen. Gosh, I do find myself occasionally giving marriage advice. I hope my advice never looks like this. This shows the culture. Vashti is not the king's partner, she is the king's property. And so an empire-wide announcement insists that all women will respect their husbands from the least to the greatest. Doesn't matter how good a husband you are, your wife has to respect you. Notice the irony in the law. A law is passed to enforce respect. Why? Because respect has been lost. What begins as a celebration of power ends in a scramble to maintain authority. I've never tried it in my marriage. I might one day, hopefully not. But I can't imagine saying to my wife, I have made a decree. There shall always be one sugar in my tea in the morning, and it shall arrive at this temperature. Could you imagine? No, I wouldn't be here next Sunday. I'd be repenting and prayerful. She wouldn't, but can you imagine it? That's not how you do it. Or imagine if you were in a workplace environment and your boss mucks up and you find yourself completely disrespecting him because of the way he's acted and treated people. And he comes in and sends an email saying, yes, that was all horrible and nasty this week, but just to remind you, you do have to respect me. That's going to go down well, isn't it? Everyone's going to go, oh, okay, sorted. Glad now, clarity. Fascinating. Seriously, this man needed a cabinet reshuffle. This is not good advice. The great king is reduced to legal maneuvering to save face. Here we see a glimpse of the emptiness of his power. It dazzles, but it does not last. It directs respect, but it cannot command it. It seeks control, but it cannot escape its weakness. So, at this point, you may be asking, what does this have to do with us? This is a great story. It's a great opener, and we look forward to the next 9 chapters. But few of us sit on thrones or issue decrees to 127 provinces, even if we really would like to sometimes. I struggle to get our 2 children to go to bed at night, let alone command 127 provinces. But pride and the hunger for control runs through every human part. If we are honest, we're all familiar with those sensations at some point, those desires. Even if we know we don't want them, they still creep up on us. We all know what it is to want to be admired, don't we? We like people liking us. I think it's one of the most normal feelings. It's not necessarily a good one, but we know things. And social media feeds this. Social media can become mini banquets with carefully chosen photos, achievements on display, little glimpses of our glory. Or maybe our work, or our family, or even our church. We long for recognition. But pride is fragile. The moment someone fails to notice us, we feel something. What do we feel? Offended. Or shameful. Or all sorts of emotions. The moment we are challenged, we go to defensive. Sometimes someone says something to me that's really quite rude, or I take it really badly, and I've had to fight myself and train myself not to get straight into defensive mode. And now I say phrases like, did you mean it to sound like that? Because often they don't. And they weren't trying to attack me, but I felt attacked. But I can go into defensive mode, which just doesn't bring us to a good place. Or I can try and say, well, I want to find out what's going on here. My iPad's turned off. Stop it. Camera's upside down. There we are. Why do we get defensive? What is it that we're worried about losing? It reminds me of the Hans Christian Andersen tale, The Emperor's New Clothes. Do you remember that one? There was once an emperor who loved clothes. He wanted to be the biggest and the best and the grandest. And two con artists came up to him and said, we can make you the best and most amazing clothes. They're so good, only wise people can see them. Only the really best wise people can see them. Now, you know he looked at that hanger and saw nothing, don't you? But he couldn't tell them that. He couldn't tell them that, could he? So he put them on. Could you imagine? I always imagine the Emperor's New Clothes wondering, like, what do you do if you don't know what they look like? Do you know if you should button them up or not? It's a problem in that story. Anyway, I spend too much time thinking about these sort of things. He didn't want to admit it. Nobody around him wanted to admit it. All his friends didn't want to say to the emperor he was making a fool of himself. Do you remember who told him? A child. He was parading through the town naked. Look at my new clothes. They were looking at something. And the child says, he's naked. And then everybody went, oh yeah. The bubble had burst. The whole court had gone along with the pretense until that child exposed the truth. This is the nature of pride. It looks powerful and we want it, but it is empty and often ridiculous. Xerxes was the emperor with no clothes, all pomp and splendor, undone by the refusal of one person. There's also a warning here about human power structures, whether political, economic, or cultural, because they can often look immovable. And I think we've had times in recent months, haven't we, where we've been frustrated with powers and governance in our country, and we've thought, how do we possibly come up against that? But I want to tell you that Esther reminds us that none of this is permanent, that God is on his throne. Whilst his name is never mentioned, it shows us of his providence, his wise, purposeful ordering of events fills every page. God is on his throne, no matter what a government on earth does. The fall of Vashti opens up the way for Esther, and through Esther for the salvation of God's people. What looks like chaos is actually the beginning of redemption. This is the heart of the gospel. On the cross, human pride and political power seemed to triumph, didn't they? Roman governors and Jewish officials showing off their pride and their strength and their power by killing the guy who tried to oppose them. They felt quite strong that day. They felt quite in charge that day, didn't they? Yet in that moment of apparent weakness, God accomplishes the greatest act of salvation. As Paul writes in Philippians chapter 2, Christ humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place. This calls us, I want to argue, to humility. True security does not come by us projecting strength, but resting in Christ. That is why we must come before God in confession. We mustn't just do it once in a while. For some, we must do it daily, and for me, often more than one time a day, because we all fall short, and we must return often to his mercy. Psalm 139 gives a good pattern for this. Search me, God, and know my heart. See if there is any offense in me. This prayer disarms pride, doesn't it? It takes it before it takes root. Reminds us again and again our hope is in Christ. Second, it teaches us to trust God's hidden hand. We'll look at that more and more as we go through. But I want to tell you that whatever happens in the world, God is still upon his throne. The book of Esther, over and over again to me, is like God whispering, I'm here. I've got this. I find myself, reflecting at the end of each day about the day, or in the morning and then I often in a week I pause and I look back at the week and I ask myself, where was it that God was at work that I missed? because I so often do. And the more I do that, the more I see him. And I want to encourage you, get used to seeing God at work in your life. Okay, Esther chapter 1 is not a fairy tale beginning. It's messy, it's full of pride, drunkenness, expectation, and anger. Yet it sets the stage for God's salvation. Worldly power is shown empty, human pride is exposed as fragile. But behind it all, God is beginning a redemptive story that will point us all the way to Christ. When power and pride collide, the cracks appear, and it is in those cracks that God is at work. He is not absent, he is not defeated. God's kingdom cannot be shaken. Xerxes used Vashti for his pride. Christ lays down his life for his bride. That's the power we're called to trust and to imitate. And so let us walk humbly, trust deeply, and live hopefully, knowing that even when the stage is filled with the noise of worldly power, God is working behind the curtain and salvation is on its way. Amen.